on the response to COVID and health issues and what persons with disabilities need in order for them to be fully included when it comes to health. Our theme for our health, our planet and our future cannot come to pass if persons with disabilities are left behind while implementing these aspects in life. So welcome, Dr. Sruti.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. So, first of all, it was very interesting to attend the People's Forum and listen to the experts speaking on health, building back better, on climate, what we can do about the vulnerable communities, and also about participatory governance. The word inclusivity, inclusion were used again and again. But when it comes to people with disabilities, merely using the term inclusion doesn't happen. There are a lot of things that we observed and a few interventions we made. And I would like to tell you, there are two international events that happened. In 2019, the UN came out with the first report on development and disability. And this happened after the UN Convention had been signed in 2006 and the Sustainable Development Goals were in force in 2015. And both these things stated that nobody should be left behind. But the 2018 UN report showed that in none of the 15 SDGs, people with disabilities were near even the benchmark. We were far below, discriminated, and our needs were not being addressed to. The second event was the COVID-19 pandemic, and country after country took decisions. There were shutdowns and lockdowns. But when we took these decisions, we forgot the unique need of people with disabilities. We forgot a fact that many of the disabled are dependent on caregivers. So for 48 hours, more than 24 hours, 72 hours with the lockdowns, no public transport, houses under lockdown, apartments closed, people were living in soiled clothes. They went hungry, they were famished, they were afraid because there was no support system existing. So the first thing that we need to consider when we are talking about people with disabilities is accessibility. Accessibility in everything, just now Richard mentioned. Accessibility goes far beyond physical. It's about our attitudes. It's about procedural, governance, all the aspects we have to look into accessibility. See, whether the testing centers, the quarantine centers, or the vaccination centers, none of them had accessibility for many categories of disability. What happens? People had to empty their bladders. They had to do their catheterization with hundreds of eyes of other people in the quarantine staring at them. So accessibility needs to be mandated by the Commonwealth in going forward in all our plans. The second thing is we need to develop a lot of partnership between the government officials working in the communities and the organization of people with disabilities. We don't have data. We don't have statistics. Though WHO says we are 15% of the world population. In South Asian countries, if you go around, the national census pegs us at 2%, 3%. That is grossly understated the numbers. So we need to look at data and statistics if we want to ensure that people with disabilities are counted. So there has to be a synergy between our community workers, the government workers, and organization of people with disabilities. Only then we can identify each and every person with disability, and we go by the theme, leave no one behind. That brings me to the third thing. We cannot in a blanket term use the word accessibility. We have to think about reasonable accommodation, because this population, unlike gender, is not homogeneous. We are a heterogeneous population. The heterogeneity needs to be considered. People with visual impairment, those with hearing impairment, those with autism, those with blood disorders, those with neurodiversity challenges. Each of us we have functional needs, very unique. We need reasonable accommodation, which has to be very unique. So this needs to be considered when the Commonwealth is planning any of its activities, and the government across the Commonwealth countries are planning or designing or taking decisions. That brings me to our interventions during the participatory governance. How do people with disabilities come forward and share their stories? We need to fund the organizations of people with disabilities. We need to strengthen the voice of people with disabilities at the grassroots. They must come and share their stories in platforms like this. The world must know how much we are discriminated despite strong laws existing in our countries. What can be done? We also bring you wonderful models. COVID-19 was exemplary because most of the relief work, most of the restoration and rehabilitation work for people with disabilities was done by organizations of people with disabilities. I'll give you an example. The people with spinal cord injuries, they created a barter bank. People who had catheters were sharing it with people who had diapers. People who had diapers were sharing it with Eurobags. So these kind of successful examples, how people were distributing food in the remote areas. All governments provided food support, but was it reaching the last person with disability in the last village? It was the organization of people with disability who was doing this. This successful models must come to the global scenario, to the governments of the Commonwealth countries. They must see what is the strength in the voice and in the organization of people with disabilities, and that calls for greater funding. We need funds, so that needs to be considered by the Commonwealth and by governments across the Commonwealth countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.